Burning the Israeli flag. Palestinians protest again along the Gaza-Israel border. Hundreds have been shot, more than 30 killed by Israeli soldiers, but the protesters say they'll continue until May 15th, the 70th anniversary of Israel's creation. What can they achieve? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Fuli Batibo. For a third consecutive Friday, thousands of Palestinians have been protesting at the Gaza-Israel border, demanding they be allowed back to the lands they were forced from. The so-called Great March of Return has entered its third week, and it will continue until May 15th, the day Palestinians call the Nakba, or Catastrophe, when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced in the conflict that culminated in the creation of Israel in 1948. Friday's protest was labelled the lifting of the flag of Palestine and the burning of the flag of Israel. In 5 different locations, Israeli flags were burnt down and Palestinian flags were hoisted in their places. And at a protest camp near the border, a large Israeli flag was placed on the ground for demonstrators to walk on. More than 30 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli security forces since the protests began on March 30th. These are the Palestinian Health Ministry figures. The deaths include 3 children and 1 journalist. More than 3,000 people wounded, 1,200 of them shot with live ammunition, while 300 were hurt by rubber-coated steel bullets. Now, despite the violence, Palestinians say they will not give up their protests. Harry Fawcett has more from the Gaza-Israel border.
The numbers of casualties have been very high over the last couple of weeks. Hundreds of people have been shot and injured, more than 30 killed. We've been speaking to some of the young men and boys who are preparing to approach the fence again in the face of those risks. Some of them saying that it's their right to do so, that it is their land. We even spoke to one young man who had massive injuries in one leg from the protests which came after Donald Trump's declaration on recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And he is back here. He says that he has nothing else to do, that he wants to come here and show that people here in Gaza, like everywhere around the world, want to live in a decent way and not in this constant state of conflict and essentially imprisonment in Gaza under the Israeli blockade and what is only a limited lifting of the southern border with Egypt. So that's the situation here. The Israelis have also released a statement saying that they are trying to counteract what they say are Hamas-instigated violent confrontations bent on trying to sabotage what they call the security fence, and they say, wouldn't your country do the same?
Israel's foreign ministry tweeted early on Friday about the protests, saying Hamas is preparing to initiate another violent confrontation today on the Israel-Gaza fence. Israel will continue to defend its borders and its citizens. Your country would do the same. Well, let's bring in our guests for today's Inside Story. In Ramallah, in the occupied West Bank, is Mustafa Barghouti. He's the Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative and a former Palestinian information minister. In Jerusalem, Mitchell Barak, political commentator and former advisor to the former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. And here in Doha with me, Beverly Milton Edwards, a visiting fellow at the Brookings Doha Center and author of the book, The Palestinian-Israeli Conflict, A People's War. Thank you all for being on Inside Story. I appreciate your time today. If I can start with you, Mustafa Barghouti, in Ramallah. As we head towards May the 15th, what is it that Palestinians are trying to achieve with these demonstrations? What is the end game?
It's a simple message. We, the people who have been under Israeli military occupation for 51 years, we, the Palestinians who have been displaced from our homeland since 70 years, are demanding our rights and are demanding to be free from occupation and from the apartheid system. And we are reaffirming the right of the return for the Palestinian refugees, which was affirmed by UN resolutions and by international law. But also, it is a way that Palestinians are also expressing their rejection of the administration of President Trump's decision about moving their embassy to Jerusalem and recognizing Jerusalem as a capital of Israel.
But Mustafa Barghouti, do you feel that anything has been achieved?
That claims to be
Do you feel that anything has been achieved at all in these past 3 weeks?
Yes, absolutely. I think 3 things have been achieved very clearly. First of all, this is a reflection of an amazing Palestinian unity, regardless of the internal political division, about the form of struggle we should use, which is peaceful, non-violent resistance. We've been calling for that for 16 years. I'm so proud and so happy that all the factions, without exception, are now committed to non-violent, peaceful resistance as the best form of struggle for Palestinians. That's one. Second, it's bringing back the attention to the Palestinian issue, which was marginalized and ignored for a very long time. But third, it is exposing Israel as a country that claims to be democratic, but it is using lethal weapons, using lethal high-velocity bullets against peaceful demonstrators. So far, 1,400 Palestinian non-violent demonstrators, protesters were shot by Israeli army. Not only in Gaza, by the way, also in the West Bank. Today they shot several people in Ramallah. As well as it has exposed the fact that Israel is violating international law.
Yeah.
And I think anybody who read the most recent articles in Washington Post and New York Times realizes that now Israel is exposed. And it is not a democratic country, and it's not a country that respects human rights.
Okay, let's hear from Mitchell Barak in Jerusalem. I saw you, Mitchell, shaking your head there while Mustafa Barghouti was speaking. These demonstrations, some would say, have been an effective strategy from the Palestinians to show Israel's heavy-handed response in dealing with protesters. How does Israel justify shooting these unarmed protesters, these women and children who were protesting near the border fence?
Again, why don't you just bring a whole schoolload of bus children to the border and behind them, hide some Hamas terrorists, because Hamas is actually organizing these, and, then ask why doesn't Israel just let them cut the fence and cross the border? And there are people, who are preparing weapons, meaning I don't know the New York Times Mr. Barghouti read, but I just read the New York Times article, and it said that, yes, that most of the demonstrators were peaceful, and next to the peaceful demonstrators of the women and children, there were people, preparing gasoline bombs. I call these the Guns N' Roses demonstration. Most of the people are coming with roses, but a lot of them are coming with guns and weapons, and they've said they want to cut the fence, they want to come into Israel, and they have an appetite for destruction. And that's a real problem. So if you want to talk about disproportionate force or lethal force, you're talking about a barbed wire, you're talking about a barbed wire fence and smart fences, which is not made for a rush of thousands of people, to do it. It's not a concrete fence. So when the Israeli army and the Israeli political leadership, and I didn't interrupt you, Mr. Barghouti, I didn't interrupt you. When the Israeli army and the political leadership, from the defense minister to the prime minister, say peaceful demonstrations, fine. But if terrorists are going to be involved and terrorists are going to come and try and rush the border and cross the border of a sovereign nation, they will be met with lethal force. Now, it's not as if Israel is firing indiscriminately on 30,000 demonstrators.
Let's allow Mustafa Barghouti to respond before I bring in Beverly Milton-Edwards here in Doha. Mustafa Barghouti, Israeli officials, as Mitchell Barak has said there, have accused Hamas of being behind these protests, saying that the movement is deliberately exposing women and children to danger by telling them to go near this border fence. It says the protests are basically a new tactic by Hamas to conduct so-called terror operations against Israel. What is your response to this? Is Hamas behind this protest movement?
No. All the Palestinian groups are participating in these demonstrations, not Hamas only, everybody. Second, they are all peaceful. Nobody carried a single gun in these demonstrations.
All the terrorists and the non-violent ones.
Those people, shut up. Shut up and let me finish.
Please, let's be civil here. Gentlemen, let's try to be civil.
Gaza, in the buffer, in the...
Mr. Barghouti, you interrupted me.
Yeah,
you interrupted me.
The people who were shot were
please,
shot.
Gentlemen,
Don't interrupt me. Okay,
let's Mr. Barghouti finish, please, Mitchell Barak, and let's try to be civil here in our conversation. Go on.
The most important thing that happened is that the people who were shot, the 1,400 people who were shot with live ammunition, were shot inside Gaza, because Israel is imposing what they call a buffer zone, which the width of which is no less than 800 meters inside Gaza. And anybody who enters there, they shoot him. These people, most of them, were not shot at the borders. They were shot inside Gaza. And by the way, today in Ramallah, we had a peaceful demonstration, and we were shot at. And a foreign journalist was hit in the head by an Israeli sniper. We were also shot at in Ramallah. He wants to say now that Hamas is moving us. This is incorrect. The reality is, it is unacceptable for any country, for any army in the world, to shoot civilian demonstrators with live ammunitions. And that's exactly what Israel is doing. And that's exactly what the Israeli army leaders have admitted. Okay. They said in their statement, we knew every shot. We knew who was shot. We knew where every bullet landed. That means they are admitting that they have committed war crimes.
Okay, Mitchell Barak, I'll let you respond, but let me just bring in Beverly Milton Edwards to the conversation first. I will allow you to respond to what Mustafa Barghouti has said in just a moment, but I want to hear from Beverly on what's been happening in this region and the Gaza-Israel border these past 3 weeks. The protests are now entering their third week. Mustafa Barghouti says something positive has come out of this because it has shown that Palestinian people are stepping up and has exposed Israel, he says. What do you think these protests have shown? Has anything positive come out of it for the Palestinians?
Well, I think that, as both our commentators have pointed out really rather expressively, what this is all showing is the depth of enmity between Palestinians and Israelis, and that really the dead end of peace politics. And we're seeing this, evidentially through these protests, protests which are about one of the major issues for conflict resolution between Israel and the Palestinians, a peace process that would, if it was resolved, deliver security to both sides, to Israel and to the Palestinians. So the positive is, as Mustafa Barghouti pointed out, is that the issue of the conditions of Palestinians, particularly in Gaza, and the plight of Palestinians in Gaza has really been brought to the forefront of the international audience, so to speak. And Israel itself has made a point over the last few months of pointing out how significantly bad the conditions in Gaza have become. Humanitarian organisations have been reporting that the situation is becoming unsustainable. The IMF, the World Bank have noted that that Gaza's on the brink of collapse. 90% of the water is undrinkable. 60% of the youth are unemployed, which is one of the highest rates of unemployment in the region. Maximum of 4 to 6 hours of electricity a day. And in fact, the Gaza power plant shut down yesterday. So, I mean, this highlights that. Whether that's a positive, it's a positive of negatives. But I think, as I say, more significantly, and as both our commentators are really, symbolising here, is that we're in dead-end politics.
Right. And as we heard from both our commentators there, Beverly, the Palestinians say these protests are non-violent, civilian-led. Israel says Hamas is behind all this. I'm curious to know who is winning the public opinion battle right now, if you will. It's been, 3 weeks now. Who, among the international community, who is attracting the most sympathy right now?
Well, I think there are wins for both sides, and we have to be realistic about that. So, I mean, Israel has deployed its media effort. I mean, we can see that through the role that it's playing in the international press, through social media. If you look at the IDF spokesman, or if you look at the coordinator for Gaza Affairs, you can see that there's a very fulsome response in terms of trying to maintain support and win over new supporters. And if you look at commentary on Twitter, you'll see that there are an awful lot of people behind Israel. And most importantly, of course, for the Israeli government is that Israelis themselves are behind their own government and what their own government is doing on that border with Gaza. For Palestinians, yes, what we have seen is evidence of a cumulative effect, that there are protest marches being organised, for example, in Europe, in the UK, and also in Washington. And again, that there's social media activism that links this issue of the plight of Gazans, of refugeehood, to wider debates, particularly amongst youth activists as well.
Let me bring in Mitchell Barak in Jerusalem once again. Mitchell, we've seen in this past week Israeli authorities target Hamas operatives, alleged Hamas operatives, I should say, in their positions in Gaza. Are these Israeli attacks meant to attract that and draw Hamas further into confrontation so that perhaps Israel can deal decisively with these protests and can justify its excessive use of force against these protesters?
Again, we debate. First of all, I think that Professor Milton Edwards spoke very eloquently and correctly in many of the things she said. And one thing that I would like to highlight is for Israelis, we've not only been saying for months, we've been saying for years, just like we've been complaining for years about the civilian slaughter in Syria. Israelis don't want a humanitarian crisis. Israelis don't want to deny people freedoms. Israelis don't like when children are starving and when there's no electricity. So
then
yes,
why are they blockading the Gaza Strip if that's the case? If Israelis don't want that, why are they blockading the Gaza Strip?
Well, it's very simple. It's a security issue for the most part. Meaning, remember, let's go back 12 years. There were Israeli settlements in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister, and I worked in the Prime Minister's office for Ariel Sharon when he declared it. I said Israel is going to leave Gaza, and it almost tore this country apart because there were a lot of people that didn't want to do that. He says we don't need to be there. Now, in the 12 years that the Hamas or the Palestinian leadership has been in charge of Gaza, what have we seen there? We've seen more hunger, more destruction. The blockades are related to the tunnels, meaning it's nice to let concrete go in and building materials. But if buildings are not getting built and tunnels are getting built to launch terror attacks against Israel, that's a problem. But there are thousands and thousands and thousands of tons of supplies coming in every month. So it's not an issue. So yes, there are certain things that are blockaded, but there are also smuggling tunnels and tunnels where terror is taking place.
But surely you're not denying that there's suffering going on in Gaza.
Israelis, it's only a security issue.
It's a security issue, you say?
Oh, for sure. Of course there's suffering. It's terrible.
Okay.
It's a terrible situation. And I believe that the Palestinian people, let me just say this, I believe the Palestinian people who are living in Gaza, they deserve better. And a lot of those people coming to the protests are coming out of frustration, and they deserve a better leadership than the terrorist organization that they have elected, who thinks that getting what they want is burning an Israeli flag and continuing to call for the entire destruction of the state of Israel. You know, when Mustafa Barghouti started his comments and said what he'd achieved, he sounded very logical and plausible, said, here's our claims against Israel. Okay. So you don't need to burn tires to do that, which is a horrible, situation of people getting smoke inhalation. You don't need to charge the border. You don't need to throw Molotov cocktails over the border. You don't have to threaten, and you don't have to call for the destruction of the state of Israel and the annihilation of every last Jew.
Mitchell,
why? Say what you have to say and try and come to the table. In the end of the day, that's how it's going to work.
Okay, Mustafa Barghouti, your response.
Enough. Well, first of all, of course, the Israelis like to keep claiming that they are victims in this conflict. But let's look at the facts. During the last 3 weeks, not a single Israeli was injured. 31 Palestinians were killed by Israeli snipers, including a journalist, including people who were providing first aid.
Wasn't that journalist a member of the Hamas?
1,800 Palestinians
was that journalist a part-time member of Hamas?
Can you not interrupt me? Can you shut up, please?
Wait a second.
I did not interrupt you. Don't interrupt me. Don't interrupt me. Israel is practicing. Yeah, but please don't let him interrupt me. Please. I respected him. He should respect me. Okay. Don't interrupt. Israel is practicing. Israel is practicing state terrorism because it is bombarding Palestinians. It is occupying Palestinians. You cannot equate between Palestinians and Israelis. This is unacceptable because one side is occupying the other. One side is oppressing the other. The Israeli side is practicing a system of apartheid against Palestinians. I have met so many foreign ministers and so many journalists in the world, and they've all been telling us, why don't you use the Martin Luther King strategy? Why don't you march in thousands demanding your rights? That's exactly what we are doing. Why is he upset? Because we convinced Hamas not to use military weapons and Hamas accepted to use our method of nonviolent resistance. He's angry because it is exposing Israel, which is, by the way, never left Gaza. Israel is still occupying Gaza. I'll tell you why. Because Israel is imposing a buffer zone inside Gaza. 24% of Gaza is prohibited for Gazans, who are 2 million people living in 140 square miles. Israel is putting Gaza under siege. That's why people in Gaza don't have electricity. That's why people in Gaza don't have clean water. That's why people in Gaza cannot have work and are unemployed. Israel is having a siege on Gaza for 12 years. Israel is shooting fishermen who are trying to fish in the sea if they go beyond 6 miles into the sea.
Okay.
What kind of withdrawal is that? This is not withdrawal. Israel is still occupying Gaza and still oppressing Gaza and oppressing us in the West Bank.
Let me reiterate
again.
We
were shot at today in Ramallah,
yes,
not in Gaza, by the Israeli army.
I just want to pick up a point about the Palestinian journalist who was killed last week by the Israeli security forces during the demonstrations. Mitchell Barak, you said he was shot because Israel believes he's a Hamas operative. But this is a journalist who had been vetted by the U.S. State Department, who had been given a grant by the United States, and who was wearing a vest with the words press written on it. How do they justify killing him?
I don't know. You'll have to ask the Israeli Ministry of Defense that came out with his Hamas membership card. Okay, they released a statement that said he's a member of Hamas. So, I understand, the frustration. But to say there are no casualties on the Israeli side, of course not. Because you have thousands of people, or within a group of tens of thousands of people, trying to rush a secured, sovereign border of a country. What do you think is going to happen? You think our side is going to take losses? Of course not, because we're sitting behind the fence, and that side is rushing the fence.
Okay.
And when you do that, and when you try and cut the fence, and when you try and go beyond the Israeli border and enter Israel to do harm, the Israeli army is going to stop that.
We've made this point before.
Okay.
Let's try and move the discussion a bit forward, and I want to bring back Beverly into the conversation. Beverly, what do you see that Israel fears the most today? Is it these unarmed Palestinian protesters? Is it the Palestinian factions, Hamas? What is it that Israel is so scared of? Israel, which has one of the most sophisticated armies in the world.
I think that Israel is concerned at the moment with both its southern border, which is where these protests from Gaza are arising from, and the momentum's only going to build. Mm-hmm. And the Israeli defense and intelligence establishment will be well aware of this and planning for their responses. Right. But Israel also is concerned with what's happening on its northern border, and particularly with Syria. and what the Western retaliation may be, and the ways in which that might cause a domino effect and draw Israel in. I think that actually within the defense and intelligence establishment, there's little fear. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I suggest this is that within the defense and intelligence establishment, everybody knows the rules of the game. For example, Hamas, by and large, has respected the ceasefire that was achieved in the wake of the 2014 war. Mm-hmm. If anything, Hamas has acted as a bulwark against wider security concerns for the Gaza border with Egypt and the Sinai, which also matters to Israel, particularly in terms of preventing a proliferation of groups like ISIS or Al-Qaeda. So I think the fear is expressed by political leaders in Israel, and understandably so, because it plays on wider memories of the effects of the conflict from Gaza several years ago.
Just briefly,
yes.
The protests are expected to continue until May the 15th. Just a few days before that, I think 2 days before that, the American embassy is supposed to be opening in Jerusalem.
Yes.
How much of an explosive situation could we be looking at in the weeks ahead?
Look, I think we all need to understand that this will be a touchstone issue. We're talking about Generation Hopelessness here. Mm-hmm. We're talking about a generation of young Palestinians who form the majority of the population in the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem, who've known nothing other than conflict with their neighbour. And not only that, but we see from leaders elsewhere in the region, for example, King Abdullah II of Jordan, has time and time again emphasised with the Americans that this is such a wrong move. This sends out the wrong signals in terms of what should have been a stated aim to create peace in the Middle East.
Thank you so much, Beverly. We'll leave it with that. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you for a very interesting discussion, a heated one, I must say. And I'm sure we'll be talking about this issue again in the coming weeks here on Al Jazeera. Thank you, Mustafa Barghouti, Mitchell Barak, and Beverly Milton Edwards. And thank you as well for watching. You can always watch this program again by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside. Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Of course, our handle is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Fuli Batibo, and the whole Inside Story team, thank you for watching. Bye for now.